these things, but since we got a couple hours to kill.
Yes, yep.
Not Washington, February. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I just left.
Oh, that's why, yeah. No, I escaped.
Public hearing, also followed by our workshop number 2, which is also the final budget workshop today. There isn't any public signed up, so we should proceed right to the budget workshop. And we also have Deb Poland that has called in, so she's on the line and she's on speaker.
Good evening, everyone.
Can everyone hear her? I'll turn it up. Okay, all right. Okay. Okay,
Probably got her locked out.
I do. Okay, Deb, go ahead.
I just wanted to say good evening, everyone, and thanks for accommodating me this way.
All right, thank you.
Deb, it's standing room only. Standing room only, Deb.
I'm
It's
watching on
amazingly.
WHTV, so I can see that.
I told you there wouldn't be a lot of people here. I lied.
All right, so we shall proceed. So, in terms of the budget workshop, I know that this second one usually is around any questions or further information that board members are interested in hearing about. Who would like to begin with any questions or further explanation? Dave.
Thank you. I would like to pick up where we kind of left off last time we were talking about the CABE membership, as you may recall, and there were some questions as to why it was in this budget this year, and to be honest, I had the same question. I said, well, what caused it to come back this year? And I posed that to Carol, and Carol reminded me, well, when we voted a couple of years ago, we said we put it back in the calendar, to look at it in the future. And it was bothering me, so I went back and I watched our last budget meeting. It was the year with the contentious budget and mini cuts. and I got to the point where we talked about CABE, and it was actually me who suggested that we bring it up. So that's all on me. I certainly agree that CABE, I'm such a big fan of it. They do good work, good things throughout the state, not just for small districts, but also for large districts. However, I do find myself in the place as we were 2 years ago, in that given our particular situation, where we are, and the abilities that we have as the 9th largest district in the state, everything that they provide is, a lot of what they provide is not what we need. However, I do agree that one of the biggest benefits that they give is the annual conference. It's a great introduction to the Board of Ed process, what you need to do, what you don't need to do. You get to network, meet other people, and it would be a shame if our members could not attend that conference. But fortunately, there is the option for non-CABE members to attend that annual conference. It's only a slightly higher fee, and it definitely is an option I would encourage all our board members to take advantage of, so we could do that and still not need to renew our membership at this time. However, I would like to encourage us to once again put this on a future for the board to reconsider in a year or two. Just take a look at it, and that's my opinion.
So Dave, that's very interesting that you look back on it. I appreciate that. Because my memory, it's funny. I can remember a tree guy came over today, and I remembered what he told me 7 years ago about a particular tree. And I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I don't know why that works that way. And this is why, and you just mentioned it again, Dave, and I appreciate how you work and how you mention it, and you want it to come back 2 years from now because you're not sure it belongs here. And you talked about the air conditioning. And the reason I'm not a fan of the way that is articulated is because we're not going to remember. Carol may not be the chair, and we may not, none of us may be here. And a board member that doesn't sit here today would have to go back 2 years from now just to find out. And I don't necessarily think that's good policy making, and we hope that it comes 2 years from now. What I would like, and even in the air conditioning, yes, air conditioning, if you want to look at it 2 years from now, probably a smarter Board of Ed than us that would want to look at that, and that's their purview. That's why I don't like saying, hey, let's look at it from 2 years from now, because who knows what 2 years from now brings. It's a matter of that board being smart enough and articulate enough, working with this particular superintendent. Not that you won't be here from 2 years from now, but that those kind of things, if CABE comes back up, that it's done, not by memory of a meeting 2 years ago, a long meeting 2 years ago, because I certainly didn't remember that, but brought up in what I would like to call as a professional manner, not in a caucus, but in a board, so that it doesn't come silent and you leave us two out. If CABE wants to come on as a budget line item for us to discuss like it is today, I would appreciate that we as a board would talk to it as together. If you want to do it in caucus, that's your purview. You can do that. You eliminate two people from that discussion, and that discussion is relevant to a particular line item in our budget, which we all have a vote on. So I would appreciate going forward if that's how we can operate. If not, that's fine too. I would just like to know that, so I know what to expect. In previous boards, it was very clear what to expect. We changed that with a chair, and that continued to have open dialogue with, it was Jay and I at the time, and we really appreciated it, and we thought very highly of that, and we felt part of the board, if you will, and that's gone away. So enough on that. As far as what the CABE, I never had the pleasure of going to their conference, so I can't speak on that. I'm sure they do a knock-up job, and we could still attend, obviously, as a non-member. When I was on the policy meeting, CABE often came up as policy, and it was a guide, and we didn't always use it, but that was the only thing as a board that I was aware of that we used it for, and it was intermittent. You know, we could go a year without looking at a CABE policy, or we can go 2 months in a row seeing 2 policies. So to pay for $22,000 to look at policies that we as a 9th largest school district, through the help of actually Tom Mooney's office, our lawyer, has helped us guide through and navigate through some of those policies. I'm not necessarily sure that spending the $22,000 is prudent. So I would, my vote would be to remove that line item 5592 for board. And to Dave's point, we can look at it again when that board, or maybe next year, this is the same board and we remember, and it's brought up because I'm sure the chair gets emails about it. We can be reminded at that time again and discuss it with a different board that would look like next year. So that's my nickel's worth, I guess.
Well, first, I'd like to address the comments about what occurs in a caucus. I don't believe you're aware, and I don't believe it's appropriate for you to characterize what may have occurred in a caucus if you weren't in attendance. By definition, members of one party of the same board. If we don't, I have a question for you. Once I finish, I'll be happy to let you jump in with a quick answer or thought. If we don't use this mechanism to ask Tom to, 2 years from now, if we're all not here, we certainly would like the board at that time to, consider this. And they can say yes or no at that time, just like the air conditioning. We had the same discussion before. I understand your philosophical disagreement. But what mechanism would you propose that we use? Because this is definitely something that I don't think we should drop. And as you mentioned, if we rely just on memory, well, that's not going to happen.
So, no, I appreciate that. And so what mechanisms we use? Intellect and need. So the board that would sit here, I would give them the freedom of their own intellect of what the school system needs. And coming up with ideas, seriously, 2 years from now, air conditioning may not be an issue at all. You don't know. I don't know. It may be, but that mechanism resides on that particular board. This isn't a household where you say, I'm going to paint the room, not this year, but next year because it's my budget. That's your house. That's your thing. You have your vote in your house and that's it. That's what you do. But this is a public forum and people get elected to these positions. So I don't mind that you'd like to remind them, but what's the mechanism of reminding them? Have someone have to go back and review a TV program, what was it, 4.5 hour meeting to go line item by line item and do that every week? No. If someone's going to do that, then have at it and watch every single meeting to see what's going on. But I think that the board that gets elected in the future will have their own needs and intellect to figure out what the school system needs and what is best for the teachers, students, and the town. So, just like, and actually Rob mentioned, even some of the old members, I often bring up some things that I remember from the past. Anecdotally, I don't necessarily put it on a agenda typically, but brings up anecdotal ideas and things. So I just would like the freedom of a particular future board to have their own discussions and to figure out what they need for themselves. That's all. I mean, it's not a horrible idea, Dave. It's just, it's not efficient. It's not, there's no one here taking notes 2 years from now. Andy's going to say, oh, Dave mentioned we need air conditioning. Let's talk about it again. It's going to be a discussion amongst the 7 of them saying, hey, the days have been hot. What do we do? Just like we talked about. No one told us to talk about air conditioning. We did it though, right? So that's all. It's just a mechanism.
So my feeling on that is that it would be a reminder for them so that they wouldn't have to rely on, oh, should we do this or not? Or did we ever discuss it? And we do have Tom and the administration to do exactly what was done this time, put it in there as a reminder. And also, in fairness to Tom, when the budget first came out, he sent us an email with some highlights. And I think the very first one was, hey, we put this back in for consideration. So we were all aware of it before we even received these binders, that this was going to be in there. Every member of the board was notified that this would be there. So there's that as well. Now, on a lighthearted note, I did mention to Tom that if he wanted to, he could call this a Dave Pauluk memorial reminder, if you want. And, it is something that I believe the board should feel is important and should reconsider. At this point, though, I have to personally say, no, we shouldn't renew our membership at this time. But I appreciate the conversation. That's good.
If I could, just a point of order, Carol. So what I would do is, for a proposed cut, if it's something so this is something in the budget, so anything in the budget you'd have to vote on next week to take that out. So what I'm going to do is, as something comes up, I'll have Chip put it up there, and items that you don't want to vote on in next week. Well, no, I mean, anything that you want to raise, we'll put there, and we'll put the total there, and then you could vote item by item next week.
And I'll try and put rough numbers in here, but if there's more detailed work, they'll just be placeholders, and we'll give you the final numbers at the board adoption night. So I'm getting a sense we want to put CABE on here for negative 22,000.
I do have a question, and I know Cheryl has a question. So Cheryl, why don't you go, and it's around Cape.
Actually, what I was going to say was that as far as I knew, Tom had put it on because Cabe had asked that we reconsider. But in any case, whatever the reason is, I just wanted to say that I too agree that although they do good work and I feel bad about not supporting boards of ed in general, that we should take it out. And so I just wanted to say that and then ask you what the mechanism was, but you answered that question. So.
Okay, so I would like to see CABE stay in, and I know that I'm in the minority, and that's okay. One of the reasons why I feel strongly about this is because as a new board member, I felt that CABE provided valuable information. One, at the annual meeting, you were able to meet with other board members from around the state, and so they were really able to network with you and talk about some of the nuances of being a new board member. And also, you can call them up and run, some ideas through them in terms of what worked for your district, what didn't work, especially if it was a district similar to your size. And in addition to the annual meeting, they have webinars. They also have workshops that are all valuable to a board member. And Tom Mooney and his team does do a bang-up job. But I know that CABE also works with CAPS, and they also work closely to advocate on legislation for all boards of eds around the state. So, I'm in favor of it, and I think that came through loud and clear. But the other question was, before it was taken off of our district budget, how long was CABE associated with this district in terms of us being a member? Thank you.
20 years.
I'll talk about a $22,000 line item. Just to it was like tennis match between the two guys here. For clarification, I'm not trying to speak for Mark, but I think, I know Mark's a big process guy, and I respect that. So Dave, and from my perspective, I don't have a problem with the idea that this could be something that comes up again in a year or two as the, Dave, I don't want to call it memorial because I hope you're still with us, amendment or whatever, what have you. I think it's the process by which, and you're right, we did get this in our board books and Tom did his due diligence to let us know. And not to go too far into the weeds, but it felt more from our perspective, or at least from speaking for myself, like a surprise thing because there was no communication from you guys that just let me finish. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, it appeared that you guys knew this was in there before us. So if that's not true, then maybe that's where the confusion lied, that it seemed like you guys wanted this back in here, and so we were caught off guard in the sense that you obviously knew about it before us, where it would have just been like a courtesy, like, hey, we're asking Tom to put it back in. But if the truth is that the CABE asked for it to be put in.
No, it was Carol's communication with CABE, and in the memory of it coming up previously, it said, put that back in, and then the discussion. So I was operating under the board chair.
Thank you. So I think maybe that's just where some of the frustration lies, is that there wasn't that heads up, like how you call us to say, hey, do you have any questions or comments or concerns? I think it maybe just would have been appreciated in going forward. Like it's always nice to get a heads up, like, hey, I'm gonna let you know that this is coming. So maybe that's where some of the frustration lays or lied. I don't know.
Okay. And I recognize that.
Bridge for me, just so you know. Like I'm okay with it, and like to Dave's point, like I think we've had enough time to ruminate it, so it's okay and everything. But and this is an awfully small one, so it's not the hugest deal, I guess. But it would be more like if it was a larger item going forward, whether it's around the budget or really any other policy initiative. Like it'd be nice not to be blindsided, I guess. So that's all. I'm good with it.
So you did speak for me a little bit, and I appreciate that, because I'm a process guy, and it's the process. And you had mentioned that Tom said he put it in there, but clear.
You
Okay.
asked me, and I said, no, we met, and it was put in there, one, because CABE continuously asked about West Hartford rejoining as a member. And 2 years ago, when we took it off,
You asked Tom to put it in.
it was a discussion.
Okay, so that's all. So again, the process is because, yes, it's a small item, and it is a process. Dave, you mentioned something earlier. If something comes up that we don't know about it, and you knew about this before, the email to us through Tom, that if I have to assume that it came through a caucus, or if it didn't, then it came from the chair directly, and that's the process that I'm. You are clearly by state and local authority to have your caucus, and I appreciate that. And you can do with what you will of it. Just that the process, if we were to know, like you said, heads up, that's all we appreciate. Okay, CABE's up. Now I can intellectually talk about it instead of being surprised. That's all. And so, you said that you're for it, Carol, and I appreciate that. What's the return on investment? So let's look at your house for a minute. $22,000 because you, as a new member, felt good about what they provided you. But at $22,000, where does the feel good stop? So that's more than $1,800 a month. So the return on investment, if you particularly got something out of it, is it worth the town paying $22,000 for that? I say no. If the rest of the board members aren't equally, and the town is benefiting from it, and the return on investment is minimal, then why pay the $22,000 because there's a couple questions that you asked a year? We have legal counsel that I was on the policy for two or 2.5 years, and oftentimes it had to go through legal anyway. So those are people that we pay for on our payroll, and I just don't think it was worth the $22,000 for 3 questions a year.
And just to respond to you, so it wouldn't be just me or the chair, so it would be for all members. Well, you said you, so you're talking about me right now in the chair position, or if it's just one member. And so what I'm saying is, it's not just for one member, it would be for all members, and it's not just 2 or 3 questions. Again, it is services that they provide all year round.
So, what I said is that you used it, and I would assume we as a board, I didn't use their services. I can't speak for anybody else, but you used the services. So that's why I said it didn't benefit the entire town or board. So I did talk about everybody. So that's what I mean on the return on investment.
But at the same time that you're saying, I use it and it didn't benefit the entire board, it's the board members who were interested in learning more information more than that they came on the board with is what it benefits. And it does benefit the town through students, teachers, staff, or faculty, what have you, because it's about policy, it's about professional development and networking and doing other things, shared experiences that we all can learn from. Mark, so we're not an island unto ourselves. We're one of many town boards around the state. And that is what CABE's obligation or role is, to represent all those boards in the state of Connecticut.
So, I find this all very interesting. I don't know if anybody else does. I'm on another board. As some of you know, I'm on the board of realtors. And a lot of this conversation is similar to the conversations we have over there sometimes, where we talk about like future boards, because we're also not there forever either. It's another volunteer thing that I do. My wife wonders where I make money sometimes. But so, you know, in line with like, just to kind of comment on what you're saying about, you know, CABE and everything, you know, for the new board members coming on there, we do what I feel like is a very similar kind of introduction in the beginning of the year that we do here, where we sit with Tom and we go over the FOI and like the conflict of interest and all that stuff. And I don't know that, you know, if you want to get something out of CABE, because, you know, I took Mark's place on the policy committee, and I guess I just feel like because of our size, as people have cited, we have such support and great staff to fill maybe the roles that some of the smaller districts don't have. And I'm a bang for buck guy, so I'm like, well, if we've got the staff in place that seem to be doing a great job when it comes to the policy stuff. I mean, I've been sitting on those meetings for a year now, and they do. Andy's great, Gina's great. And, you know, I feel like we get some basic training as new members when we come on. $22,000 just seems like a lot. Like if you want to go to a conference, then you can do that, and that's not going to be a huge expense to you. It just doesn't, like, I guess if it was $2,000, then I'd be like, fine, forget it. But it just seems to me like the bang for the buck isn't there, maybe, Carol? I don't know. I mean, I do try to think, like, you know, someday when we have new members, like, will they really want to rely on that? And I guess to everyone's point, then, well, then, you know, let them discuss it. I just feel like definitely right now, like, our town doesn't seem like it really needs it with the orientation we go through as new board members and the support staff that we have on the policy committee and all the, you know, directors and, you know, senior management. It just seems like we have a lot of people in place that maybe those other districts don't, where they get that benefit. So, you know, I appreciate that it seems like a majority doesn't think we need it. I appreciate you wanting it. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I'm like, it's just, as much as it's not like a huge line item in a $169 million budget, it's still $22,000. So that's why I don't know that even if I'm on the board 2 years from now or longer, I don't think I would ever support it, because I think West Hartford just does a great job of filling that CABE expense. And if people really want to go to an individual event, they could. So I hope we can move on.
Well, I appreciate the healthy discussion. So, Chip, we can put that on there, and then we can have a vote on the second. Deb?
Hi, yep, not on this issue. No.
Okay. All right. Mark?
I would like to talk about, and I'm trying to find it right now, is the fund that we that Tom put aside for our governor's teacher's pension. And Tom, 10?
The $500,000.
Yeah. Which one? Page 10? Thank you, Dave. Okay. Yep, teacher pension contribution.
13.
Yep, thank you. So $524,000 and $524,216. I appreciate why Tom put it in there. We had our meeting on Monday night. with the town councilors, and Tom mentioned it, and in fact, they reached out to me and they asked why Tom put them in there, and I articulated it was a great idea. He line itemed it, and that we are probably one of the few Board of Eds in the state, if not the only, I think Tom mentioned, and, sometimes I talk about leading, and we definitely led there, to put it in our budget. And what happens is that budget line item then gets added to the towns, and then the town gets presented, and Ronnie was here earlier, and then that gets disseminated, and there's a new mill rate out there with this in there. And I feel that this is an opportunity to cut that particular item, because one is no one is doing it, and as I understand it from a state perspective, is that there's not a lot of tolerance on both sides of the aisle for this particular line item. So if we removed it, it would drop our budget, total budget, I believe, below a normal roll-forward budget, and it would, it's a little more than $500,000. And I think it's, as much as I agree with why Tom put it in there, and I do, I think that we should actually remove it from the budget as well, because there's anything could happen, right? I'm not a betting man on this one, but the tea leaves say that this potentially won't go through, and no other Board of Ed through the state has done it, so I think here's an opportunity to make a cut that our constituents would see.
If indeed it stays as a requirement, if it does pass, then it doesn't matter if we put it in or not, we have to pay it. And so, in that sense, if we have to renegotiate a mill rate because of it now or later, it seems a little disingenuous to say, well, we'll just do it later. On the other hand, I'm very interested in what you said about the likelihood of it passing. Last time, we thought there was going to be a $9 million cut, and we had a debate about whether or not we're going to cut it, and we decided no, because we didn't think it was going to happen. So if we don't think it's going to happen, and again, I'm looking at you because you said this, but I don't know who to look at. If we really don't think this is going to happen, I totally agree. There's no reason to put this in. If we think it's more than 50-50 that it's going to happen, I actually think we should leave it in as a point of honesty, because we have to. So I look for guidance from people who know more than me.
So, and I do remember the time that we did that as well. I guess because we vote, a week and a half or something next Tuesday, we actually vote on this budget, right? So then it goes forward and the budget is sealed, right? And what we talk about, and we do, and Chip does, and we present a very conservative budget per se, and we often give money to the $1 million plus back to the town, and we do that without hesitation. So let's just, for argument's sake, say we give $1.5 million back to the town from this particular budget because of efficiencies or whatever happens through, we don't have any catastrophes, then we, instead of giving 1.5, we give them 1 million back to the town. And that's part of that argument as well. So it's something that when we vote on this next week, it's written in stone particularly, right? After the town council votes on it. So I just think that this is an opportunity to show good faith to our community and remove it.
I don't know if this is a question for Tom or anyone. Can you refresh my memory, somebody, like as far as the $1 million on average that we've been giving back for several years, what exactly do our friends on the town side do with that money? Where does it go?
I'm going to make Chip answer. Yeah, I'd say over the past 10 years, it's $800,000 average.
Yeah, it's about $800,000, about a 0.8%. It's varied anywhere from 0.1% at $200,000 to about 1% with a 1.2 million return. Typically, what the town does is it combines our surplus with their surplus, because they always run a surplus of $2 or $3 million. I think it was $4 or $5 million last year. So we're part of the surplus, but we tend to be a small part of the surplus. And then, depending on what their needs are, it either flows into their fund balance to meet their fund balance targets for the rating agencies, Other years, they've used it to fund the CNRE portion of their capital budget. Once it's a surplus, it just sort of becomes fungible at that point in time. But those are the two main uses. And the CNRE money typically flows back to us as the Board of Education, because our computers on our furniture and those two areas are funded by CNRE, so.
Are you referring to the capital improvement budget that we
Capital
passed?
non-recurring expenses.
Okay.
There's two components of the capital budget. One is a bonded part, and then the other is the capital non-recurring, which is actually a direct appropriation.
Thanks. So just as a follow-up comment, kind of to Mark's point, I guess, and, the fact, I like the word fungible. I haven't heard that one in a while. I guess my concern is, because we've talked about this for years, and I admire the fact that, you guys are doing such a good job with the budget that that there is this surplus that you give back instead of just spending it and everything. My concern is, especially after the meeting we had the other night, is that, it becomes a bit of a slush fund to them, right? Where since they can kind of do what they want with it, and I guess I take issue with that when, I'm sitting in a room of town councilors and all I see are increases in spending and increases in staff where, I'm trying to beat up Tom about cuts or efficiencies, or to an extent you guys, and then I'm not hearing any sort of similar serious debate on that side. And so my concern is, to Mark's point, so if we don't take this out of the budget and then all of a sudden instead of $1 million or 800,000, we're giving them well over $1 million, is what are they doing with it? Where I feel like if we can try and tighten our number as much as possible, so I'm a self-employed guy, so and this kind of relates to me as when you pay taxes every April, or maybe a lot of you get refunds because if you're W-2'd, but when you're a self-employed guy, you have a little bit of a game of chicken with Uncle Sam because you pay quarterlies, and my philosophy has always been that instead of floating Uncle Sam a loan, which a lot of folks do by getting a refund, interest-free by the way, because I don't think they send you a check, I let Uncle Sam float me a loan, and so I'll owe in April. This kind of has the same kind of vibe to me where, so we're giving them money back for free that I don't know what the heck they're doing with it. So I'd rather try and not do that, I guess, because I don't have the same sense of confidence that I do in this room that you guys really do take this seriously, and I'm still gonna try and squeeze, but I feel like that's my purview here. When it comes to the town council, I don't know that anyone's really doing that as much over there after the meeting we had recently. So I guess that's my point, is that as much as I appreciate you putting this in here too, Tom, and I actually lean the opposite direction from Mark and Cheryl. I kind of do want to leave it in. I appreciate your honesty and thinking that this is actually going to happen. And maybe Mark knows something I don't, because I kind of got the breeze that this is coming. Winter is coming. So, I'll kind of follow the whatever the majority opinion on this is as far as what you guys want to do here. But the overarching thing I'm trying to get across in this long-winded comment is that, I want to try and limit the money that we've given back. I appreciate that you're doing it, but since I'm not confident that they're being as serious about this money as we are, I'd rather us tighten the screws on our end.
Yes, hi. I must have ESP'd to you that I had a question to ask. So first off, I want to ask a process question about this, which is if we do take the money out of our budget, and then it turns out after we pass our budget and the town council passes the budget for the town and sets the mill rate, when the state passes its budget, we do need to pay some amount of money that's more than what we have in our budget. What is the process for doing that? But I also just want to state for the record that I don't really think it's appropriate for any of the members of the Board of Ed to imply that the town council members aren't cautious with money or fiscally responsible. And I just want to put that out there. I wouldn't want them implying that about the Board of Ed, and I don't think that we should imply that about the town council. But so that said, what would be the process if we do end up with a larger bill from the state than we have budgeted for?
I think that would depend on the specific legislation that the state passes in terms of who they expect to pay the bill. So I don't think we can answer that question at this point in time.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, sometimes the state says the Board of Ed shall pay X, and other times it says the town of X will pay this amount. So I don't know what the final legislation is going to look like.
So let's pretend it says that the town should pay it, or the Board of Ed should pay it. I guess either way it would happen after our budgets are passed and after the mill rate was set by the town council.
So
I guess
that's
regardless of whether it comes from our side or their side, if it's not budgeted for, do we then have the town council go back and amend the town budget and raise the mill rate, or how does that work? Have we ever been in that situation before?
No. We've not been in that situation. If the board has to make the payment, then the town would presumably you'd go back to the town and say, hey, let's increase our budget by $524,000 after everything is set. Not sure how that conversation would go. If the town has to pay it, the town would make an appropriation for it. They would have to modify their appropriation. They do that all the time, so they would certainly be easily able to make the modification. The mill rate's already been set, so it would probably come out of fund balance, is where it would come out of. So I expect if they decide to do this at the last minute, they're going to have a difficult time passing it at the legislature.
Okay, thank you.
So I assume it would come, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, so just following up on that question then, if I understand what you're saying correctly, if we do take it out and then the bill passes, that's okay. In other words, the reason that I was saying to leave it in was if we're going to have to pay it, let's be honest and put it in the budget. But if what you're saying is it's not going to pass in that way, so if we pass without it, then that's fine, they can't go back and do it, then it does make sense to cut.
We're all in hypotheticals now, so you can create a hypothetical for whatever scenario you want. So I can't.
I'll go for that then.
I can't tell you which the hypothetical is going to turn out to be reality.
I mean, this had an impact last year when Governor Malloy went out and it affected other districts more than us when there were rescissions that came. Those rescissions, it depended on the town how they took it, whether it was out of ECS funding and what does that mean for the town versus the school. So if they shifted this, I mean, the town had, what, a $225,000 increase in the proposal for ECS this year? Somewhere in that vicinity, I think. And then a $524,000 bill. ECS isn't part of our budget. It's just not. It's what goes to the town to offset educational cost. That could be an area where they took from that. So it depends what they do. I mean, there is a pension issue at the state level. How they're going to go about doing it, I've heard certain things legislatively about this. We saw how ECS cuts went last year when it went out to the whole legislature in their communities. This is something that hasn't been met with welcoming arms by legislators for their local communities. That's the way I'd put this so far. But again, I don't make promises when it comes to vote at the legislature. I have certain feelings, certainly, about the way it's come out. So.
Following up a little bit on what Deb said, I do agree that it's inappropriate for the Board of Ed to discuss in details about what the town council is doing. The meeting we had the other night was the education liaison meeting, where we did have an opportunity for that, where the Board of Ed budget was presented, and the town council got a chance to get an in-depth look at that. And then we were also presented with the town council's budget. And you may recall, Rob, that at one point they talked about adding a position because it would create efficiencies. And Mark, this is where I might need your help because I also can't remember the specific wording that I used 2 nights ago. But I think I asked, do you expect that this position would pay for itself over time? And the answer came back that yes, that is certainly the hope. So is that what you recall? Yeah. So there is certainly concerns there and planning, and I appreciate that on the part of the town council. I also appreciate the give and take we had the other night. It was good, and I hope that can continue in future Ed liaison meetings.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but if there are surplus funds, several $1 million that the town is deciding how to appropriate, and all of a sudden we have an extra $500,000 bill, that's where the money's going to come from. Am I incorrect in that assumption?
We don't control the town budget, so I really can't comment on that.
Okay.
It's an educated guess, though.
The, historically, yes.
Okay,
And
that's all I'm
with the good
saying.
relationship,
Yeah.
yes. There is, if the language was specific enough to say, out of the Board of Ed shall pay, then theoretically, the town could say, no, you need to rescind another $524,000. You're right.
Understood.
Typically, that's not how it's worked in the past. Sir.
Right. I just want to make that point to everybody in case someone didn't have that thought. Like, I assume that's where it's come from, which just kind of supports my earlier point that they've got the town. I mean, we're two sides of the same family, but it's all the same money, as Tom has said many times. But they've got that purview. So I kind of assume that's how it'll be taken care of, and that's kind of the end of it, really.
I just want to understand your point, Rob, because if I understand you correctly, in order to, let me just cut to the chase here. I'm not given everything you're saying, I would think you would be on the side of getting rid of cutting the $500,000 from the budget. But in order to let those things happen as they happen and have it, if necessary, paid by the surplus, but not adding to the surplus. But you said, I think, that you're inclined to leave it in. So I just wondered if you would explain that.
Sorry, I know maybe there's been some circular commenting. No, I said I was a bit agnostic about it, that I would follow the majority on this one. I guess in principle I agree with Tom, and I think he's trying to do the right thing. And since we have no idea what the state will do, I appreciate that point. But I do agree with Mark, and just what I was saying earlier is, since we are giving a surplus back to the town, and I don't have any confidence about what where that money goes, I feel like we should probably take it out then, because since, based on the discussion we've had, it's come to our attention that, well, I mean, actually we've known this for a while, because Chip reminds us that we're always giving money back, and so that's why I was just asking that question. And I do actually think that that's my right to ask that question, as far as it's our money. Where does it go? Not only as a Board of Ed rep, but as a town taxpayer. And so I absolutely feel that it's within my right to question what the council does. It's just how I feel. You guys can disagree. So, yes, I do think that if we're going to be running anywhere between $500,000 and $1 million surplus based on what we normally do, and that we'll be giving that back to the town for their surplus fund to do what they will, I don't feel a need to give them an extra $500,000, especially because, as it seems to have come out in the discussion, if in their infinite wisdom decide to push this expense on the towns, that then the town will make up the decision about where they're going to find those funds, as Tom said. And sure, I guess it could get pushed on us, and that would be unfortunate. But it's my understanding in the past, the town has made adjustments. This is not the first time something like this has happened after the fact, where the town passes a budget, and then they find out about an extra expense, and guess what? That's why they have that rainy day fund. I think a lot of people in town, myself included, have no idea year to year how much money is really in there. And some people might be surprised, but there's obviously more than enough that they could take the $500,000 hit. And I would argue strongly if they ever came back at Tom and said, well, you find $500,000 to cut in your budget. And this goes back to my comment again, sorry, that, we're a lot tighter on this side than they are. So if someone's got to take the hit, it should be on the council budget.
So I appreciate, Tom, you putting this in the budget. And the reason why I say that is because sitting on the correct council, the members around that council are saying the same thing in terms of it's not in their board's budget. So it seems like the majority of towns and cities around the state are not putting it in their budget. And I think you're being transparent and upfront by including it in ours. So I appreciate the healthy discussion that we've had around this table, and I appreciate you, Tom, putting it in the budget. So is it our pleasure that we want to leave it in, or do we want to take it out? Is that something that Chip needs to add?
Put it up because you wouldn't vote on it.
No, I get that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in terms of an item to go on to vote.
I would say yes. I mean, at this point, I'm inclined to agree with Rob and Mark that maybe we should cut it. And maybe further conversation will change our mind, but I would like to actually put that up there as a proposal.
Deb?
I don't know. I'm very cautious on this one. We don't know what the legislature is going to do. I think going to be with the governor around the final budget. So I think at this point, if I had to decide today, and we have the luxury of having a whole other week before we have to really decide, I think I might leave about $300,000 in, just so that we have at least some of it covered if it does end up coming into the budget, the state budget. But that's just my first blush thought right now.
Okay, Mark, you want to comment? Add to that?
Deb, I actually think one of these things is an all or nothing. Either it is what is proposed, or we leave it out, to come up with an arbitrary number. Because Tom, I'm assuming this is not an arbitrary number. This is the number they put out. So to come up with a 300,000 because that's the number, I just don't think that's prudent. And either it is in or it's out in my mind.
Deb?
Yeah, unfortunately, I just don't know if that's how the negotiation is going to end up going, that it's either in or out. I think it's very possible that when it comes down to the budget negotiations, there's a compromise made that isn't all or nothing. So that was the reason I thought maybe we could put part of it in, but not all of it. Just an idea. Like I said, give it another couple of days to see if we can learn more.
Okay, Deb, that's noted. Rob has a comment, or?
To your point, I appreciate your concern. I share it. I think we all do. So if we do take the hit, let's say, and it's a moving number, so I would be shocked if it went up in year one, but it could, maybe instead of $500,000, it is 300,000 to use your number. So I'll just say again, to reiterate, we're giving the town back north of, it seems like a lot of years, $500,000. So if we've got that kind of money left over at the end and the town were to say to us, well, hey, you should have put this in your budget, you've got to come up with that 300 or $500,000, well, guess what? Here it is. So maybe that's a really good reason, now that I'm thinking about it, to say we absolutely agree with Mark that why do we need to put another $500,000 in? We already have that kind of built-in surplus that seems to be there. That's just my 2 cents.
No, I don't have any further comments right now.
Okay. Now it's in, as we can further discuss this on the 2nd. Okay. All right, Lorna?
I just want to say I too appreciate the discussion. I appreciate that it was a line item that was included. I certainly understand the rationale with being fiscally responsible and why we're talking about removing it. I just want to say overall, which I'm sure we all agree and recognize, this recognizing the teachers' pensions, who we certainly value the teachers, we certainly recognize the importance of this item being addressed, whether it be on the state level or the local level. So I just want to make sure that's what we keep at the forefront of our minds as we are discussing this line item in terms of what purpose it serves and how we want to respond to it in a way, again, that's emphasizing being responsible with our money.
I just want to be clear, I'm not questioning it because of the teachers' pensions. I appreciate what they do and they deserve their pension. This is a state, forever this has been a state function, and I believe, and I'm not going to fall on my sword on this, but there are certain, Tom, help me with this one, I think that they're almost finding that the town to pay for it is illegal, actually, or unconstitutional, right? Not part of, that there's a fight that.
There's an argument some have made in that way that, because technically, yeah, there's an argument for that with legislative function that would be argued, I would assume, possibly in court.
So it's not a matter of whether we feel, or I in particular, it's not that I feel bad or good about not providing funding for pension. That's not it at all. Is that this grows too, and this is significant. It grows over, I think, 3 years from now, 1.7. In 3 years from now. So 1.7 million, we're talking about $22,000 a cave. We're talking about this is potentially going to be a big number, and it's going to swamp a lot of towns. So it's the process. It's the state giving you unfunded mandates. It has nothing to do whether I support the teachers or where this money goes. It has nothing to do with that. It happens to be a line item in our budget that hadn't been there before, that maybe legally it shouldn't even be there. I just want to reiterate, we are, for argument's sake, the only town in Connecticut putting it in there. Again, I appreciate Tom's leadership on that and why he did it. But there is a reason, potentially, why we're the only ones that did it. Maybe because we have the best superintendent, and he looks forward and leans forward. But if no one else is doing it, then, we all talked about the repercussions, but the entire state would be in that same repercussions. What are we going to do? How are we going to get this money? The Lamont pension fund went forward. Now what do we do? Well, then everybody's in the same pool, right? And so you add it back to the budget, and it's there. So I not that I throw around that kind of money every day, but if we took it out and 5-6 months from now, it's back in there, we'd still be okay, and it's our budget that you see here now. So I'm just trying to prevent that, because remember what I said is that when we vote on this budget and the town council votes on it, our mill rate is affected. Taxes go up on a number that may or may not supposed to be there. That's all.
I think one of your larger points there is you're right, $1.7 million over 3 years is, that's 35 teachers that we could have had in a variety of ways. So that is no joke. And these are part of those there is a creeping pushing back on towns that is certainly coming out and pushed back on teachers too. And there wasn't a lot of hubbub necessarily made of this, but they did take the last pension piece retroactively. Really, it was added in the last budget that wasn't passed till September. So no, it's a fair point that when you talk about the state, all of a sudden $1.7 million. Now you're talking, 30 teachers. So yeah, it's a good point.
Mark, I appreciate your comment, and what I was saying was not a direct comment in terms of any statement made. It is just trying to put the focus back on the discussion and wanting to stick to the facts and the monetary pieces of the discussion. My concern was that the discussion was starting to go into other areas, which are valid points raised, but I think should be a separate discussion from what we're talking about in terms of why monies may be returned and why it may not be returned. So your point is recognized as valued. My point was just trying to bring the focus back on to why we make the decisions we do, and certainly wanting it to be based on rational thought, and of course wanting to be responsible with how we spend our money, and of course who is the one spending the money as well.
So I appreciate that, but our decision, how we make it, is insignificant to the feelings or to our teachers, because if we take it out of our budget now, right, and state mandate says, yes, it's back in, and we take care of our teachers either way. So it's not, I guess I understand what you're saying, but it's not a matter of, recognizing what this dollar amount means. There's no warm and fuzzy attached to this number. It either is or is not. And I'm saying take it out, and if state mandate says that we have to put it back in, our hands are tied anyway. So I'm not voting against a state pension for our teachers. I'm voting against taking this number out of this particular budget that has no specific agenda to a teacher and how they're going to live in the future. That has nothing to do with that.
I wasn't saying that. I'll just be more direct then with what I said what I said because with all due respect, there were comments made in terms of money being taken out or it should not be taken out because other people may use it inappropriately. I just didn't want us to continue to go down that realm. I want whatever monies we decide to take off line item wise, we're not doing it out of concern of who may or may not use the money elsewhere. So that's more of a blunt way of what I was trying to say.
That makes me feel a little better, may not feel everybody better, but I just don't want you to think I am taking money out of people's mouths because they can't retire.
That's not what I was saying at all. And I wasn't trying to be blunt like that, and I'm not trying to call anybody out. I was trying to do it in a more global way, but clearly that didn't come across that way. So I'm glad you now understand what I was trying to say.
I have a question then on the security officer. I'm sorry, the 2.0 increase security officer from 1819 to current 1920 on page 9. And that's to add 2 positions at the elementary level. So my question is, what would those security officers be doing in terms of whatever you can share with me, within not...
Currently, we have... Sure. There's nothing to jeopardize. It's pretty straightforward. Currently, our we have 2 elementary security guards that share the 11 schools that we have, the 11 elementary schools. They're primarily responsible for helping building administrators at drop-off, at pickup, making sure that drills are run in a safe manner and helping with drills. It's important that once we do a fire drill or a lockdown drill at any of our schools, but especially at the elementary schools, that we pull a team together afterwards and debrief, and they're a key part of that, making sure that we're thinking of all the different avenues to keep kids safe. The difficulty, as you can imagine, with 11 schools is with only 2 of them, it's difficult to be in multiple places at multiple times. And so, on average, they may be at 1 school a week as far as their rotation goes for that. And so adding the 2 additional will mean that we'll have 2 for the northern schools, 2 for the southern schools, and it will mean that it will double the frequency of seeing them at drop-off, helping parents, helping kids safely enter and exit the buildings onto buses, and so forth.
There is one other piece too, and I think with the equitable nature of security between our buildings will come up once we have the man-trap entryways in some but not all. And that's another piece of this, that we can't retrofit every building to be the ideal. You'd have to rebuild. There may be other ways, but there would be large expenses where it would actually be cheaper in the long run to have a larger security presence at that building than have the entryway, and you could have the security greeter type situation as you have at King Philip, where everybody that comes in meets that security officer as they come into the building. So that's the other piece of this that's important.
Wondering, because we have the SROs, is this something that could be a shared, I don't know, want to say position or responsibility with the SROs or any other?
Thank you. This actually is separate. Security guards and SROs are separate. School resource officers and community resource officers are funded through and are West Hartford police officers. Each of our high schools has an SRO. We have 3 community resource officers, one at each middle school, that share functions already at the elementary school. So they're already shared between the 11 elementary schools. This is an additional resource. As you can imagine, the community resource officers teach classes at each of our schools. They try to be present as much as possible. But again, with 3 of them covering 14 buildings, it makes it a little bit tough to have a consistent presence.
Talk about awkward conversations. I hate to sound like I'm not concerned about security, but if we're talking about drop-off, which happens at the same time for all 11 elementary schools, for example, adding 2 more isn't actually going to solve the problem either. So is what you're saying that ideally we need 11, but we're just not going to do it, so we're just going to add 2? I believe you. I'm not pushing back too hard, but I don't really see how adding 2 is going to make an appreciable difference from what we've already done.
Well, first of all, it's not solving the problem of drop-off. It's simply adding and enhancing the security at our elementary schools. I would argue that 2 doubles our resources for our principals and for our teachers and for our families at the elementary schools.
And I guess what I'm saying is, do you feel like
There's a need?
there's a need for that double?
Absolutely. I do.
Can I ask you why?
Because
I
I see on a daily basis that as parents are dealing with neighborhood issues, dealing with drop-off issues, I see with teachers and principals in drills and so forth wanting that and needing that extra support. I think it's looking at where we talk about physical safety and physical security of buildings and the enhancements that we do with entranceways and the enhancements that we do with cameras and all of that. I think equally important is looking at the soft security aspects of security guards, of community resource officers, of mental health experts, and those people being resources in those buildings. And I think it's an important component having security guards rotating through our elementary schools.
This is a component, something that I know Andy and Eric would talk more about at the end of the year as we talk about building safety and security, because it's always you're right to question security, and I understand your point completely. And I struggle with the question too, because there's part of me that says, let's ask for an SRO for every building, and a police officer in every building. I'd share with the public, people that don't know, all of our security officers are retired police officers, or public safety officers. And there's an element also, I'm trying to think of how to say this. We have significant parent pressures that continue to grow. Eric and Andy are meeting with parents often who sometimes will take things into their own hands to try to prove where we're susceptible. And we've had to say to them, that's not appropriate. And that has gone on. And so there's a lot of, this is a significant demand, and Andy and Eric and I talked a lot about this ad before we finalized the budget. This was, like I said, I try to do a balance of this and mental health. But yeah, I guess the question is, I hope it's not necessary. But again, it's something that I certainly worry about.
So Tom and Andy, if I may, would you say that we've had increased incidences over the past few years at these?
I wouldn't say we've had increased instances. I would say we've had increased concerns. I think that you have a heightened student and parent population, whether that be at high school, middle school, or elementary school. I think that you have certainly increased responsibilities at each of the schools, and I think that having those extra resources certainly will help.
I just want to come out and say I'm in favor of this ad wholeheartedly, and I understand your points. And it's definitely a tough thing to say, like, where the line is. And I agree with Tom. It'd be great to have one in every school, but we have budget constraints. So I think the two ad is basically saying, well, trying to stay somewhat budget responsible, but also address the growing concern that they have. This is where they landed, and I hope we never have to say, should we have added more? It's a bit of an insurance policy, right? And I mean, they're in the schools, or their staff are in the schools every day, and I like to kind of rely on their expertise. And I can just say, I mean, I still have school-age children. I'm not in the schools all that often, but I'm there. And I mean, you get a vibe. I mean, you just get a vibe. Like when you're a volunteer in the schools, you see things that I never saw 10 years ago, or I sure as heck never dealt with when I was in school. So, I mean, things are changing. It doesn't seem like we've crested, or just listening to these people, that we are going to go down. It seems like it's only going to increase these concerns or these issues in the coming years. So I'd rather be proactive in securing our schools than having to be reactive to something. So this is one thing that I wholeheartedly support.
So I originally looked at this line item similar to you, and said, well, why do we need security guards? And the explanation just hit me like an epiphany. It was the soft targets, the parents and the students, that we potentially probably would be a good idea. That never realized to me, because I look at it, I come from a perspective of protection and fortification, and I would kindly delete these and add an officer with a weapon at every school, because I think that's what potentially we could need. I was thinking through this, if God forbid anything happened, what's a security officer going to do with, what potentially he's going to do, but I didn't think about the soft targets and things like that, which 100% makes sense. And didn't know it, but kind of assumed it, that all our security guards are ex-safety officers, police officers. Now, having said that, I don't know the laws behind it, but they are trained and certified at some point to carry a weapon. And is there any thought to, even those security guards, not a police officer per se, but those retired police officers, maybe having such armed guards, if you will?
It would be a discussion for the board to have, with recommendations, and I'd want Eric at the table, and I'd want the chief of police at the table. I have a superintendent colleague that's done that in a district where they have a resident state trooper, and it's a long time response. In West Hartford, what we found after Sandy Hook, and I don't want to get the exact time wrong, but I know that they mapped out what the response time would have been from actual cars where they were in West Hartford at the time, and the assumption was certainly under 2 minutes that there would have been an active response from West Hartford Police, and we brought in the police officers and the SWAT team a couple years ago to show what's in an actual police car that they would respond with. So, like Rob said, I don't ever want to be wrong. This is a question that I've struggled with. I've had one opinion that I was 100% sure of, but boy, I don't want to be wrong with it. And there's a lot of different theories behind it. So I'd want other people to talk about. One of the reasons why I haven't introduced it is because of that response time. And when Chief Gove and I talked about it for a long time after Sandy Hook, I felt comfortable with West Hartford's response time and where they were at that point, which is why I didn't push it then. Go ahead, Andy.
No, and that is a conversation that we've had with, that Eric and I have had with the chief. We meet with them on a regular basis, and that's a conversation that we've had. We've actually found in real time the response time to just be astounding. We had an incident where one of our schools hit their safe shooter button by accident during a school day, and we had people there within a minute, so to speak. And so we've had very good response times. I would just like to say, and also on behalf of all of our security guards, I understand what you're saying as far as they're not being armed, but I have never come across a more dedicated group of people that truly care about the kids in our buildings and would do everything possible to save them.
I see that every day.
Absolutely.
There's no question of that. I'm on the side of more than less and more armed than not. And you talk about a fiscal conservative that doesn't like spending money, and we talk about $22,000 on CABE. If you ask me what man traps you needed at what schools, I would be behind it 100%, and we would fund it. I would try to fund it, believe me, because I think that's important. So those are the types of things that I know keep probably Tom up at night. And I'm getting a little of a clemp right now because God forbid anything like that ever happen. I would fund man traps at every. I would forego air conditioning for 3 million years, and I wouldn't bring it up. And I would do. I know, Dave. I'm sorry. It's just I love that. I love that conversation, and I'm not picking on you. I'm really not. And I would forego windows and such, but because that was something that I would never look back for on a vote for a budget. So, and we talked about that the mental. Then when we talk about soft targets, and that's what really made me feel that this is important. And I never even thought about that. We talked about how mental health is increasing, and it's not because of the move-ins necessarily. It's because of society, I guess, as well as in general. So that's actually more important now, and that soft target thing really hit with me. So yeah, I'm okay with leaving it in.
Question for Chip. I just happened to notice here the line item for this is 5116, and it's under residency. Why are security officers, or is that just something? What does it say residency there?
That's just the page in the budget it appears on.
Eric Dempsey is in charge of the office is security and residency.
Oh, okay. So do we have the ability, though, just to look at the total amount that we're spending on security officers?
Of course.
In one spot? Yeah. Okay. And I'm just reminded, there was a day when we had to take quick steps for security at schools, and you may remember the greeters that we had at every school, just as some kind of measure. When you came into school, you had to sign in. There was a greeter, and that's evolved over time to the buzzers and the cameras. And really appreciate all the work, especially through Eric Dempsey. And seems like another step in the evolution of that.
Deb, did you have anything to say on this?
Not on this topic. Thank you, though.
Okay. All right. Let's move forward.
Do we want to put it up or? No, I don't think so.
Anybody have anything else?
Let me know when it's an okay time for me to jump in.
Okay, now's good.
Oh, great. Thank you. I had a question about, we started talking about the world language supervisor last time, and as a prep to that question, I wanted to ask about the art supervisor. It looks like we have 1.8 supervisors, and I was wondering if that's like 2.9 people or a 1 and a 0.8, and how that works when it's not quite 2 people. Like, do we split it north end of town, south end of town, elementary and secondary? And if that's a model that we might be able to use for world language if we wanted to add in a partial second person.
Hi, Deb. So for arts, we do have actually 2 physical human beings who supervise our arts program. Andy Mayo, who supervises our music program, and Pam Murphy, who supervises visual arts. our visual arts supervisor has a .8 supervision responsibility, and the other 2/10 of her job is teaching, which she does at the elementary school. And just based on how elementary schools are scheduled across grade levels, that enables her to teach and still maintain her supervisory. It's not a every single day. She'll typically it's a half an hour, 2 days a week. So she'll pick up a couple of sections of art. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
And the other thing
so it makes me wonder whether that type of model is workable.
The reason it isn't workable here is because those are two distinct departments. They're labeled under fine arts, but one is fine and performing arts and one is the visual arts. So this is actually akin to English or world language. This is akin to English or social studies, where you could add the position. Right now it's a 1.0 world language. So you couldn't have one do 1.0 and the other do 0.8 in that it's the same job. And so that would be bargaining unit work. If you were going to do that, you would go, you'd go to the department supervisor model, which has been proposed at various times, where it's teaching a class. Right now, we differentiate between the number of buildings by contract, because the way its supervision goes is you would have kind of the north end schools, the south end schools. Somebody picks up. So, for example, social studies, the supervisor from the south end picks up Bristow, and to offset that point to the supervisor from the north end picks up library and media services. We cut that position a couple years ago, and those are all in agreement with the union when we go through that process. Go ahead, Paul.
I want to add one more thing, Deb, to help. It's also a discussion of scope of those of the work of the department. So within the World Language Department, just based on student enrollments, it's a much larger department. There are 47 FTE, 47 full-time equivalencies associated, which translates into 50 or more full and part-time teachers within the World Language Department across the district. Whereas within the Arts Department, that's a smaller footprint. So that translates into essentially a greater amount of supervision of teachers. And then in addition, I think, taking nothing away from any of them, it's just a matter of we have more flavors of world language. We have, as we talked about last time, 6 different language programs that are taught across the schools, with the expansion of recently of a third language at the middle school to create a greater than a 5-year sequence. So it's and the delivery mechanism is more frequent for those classes. They're going 5 days a week year-round at the middle school versus your arts rotation, which is a 6-week rotation that gets repeated. So it's just a bigger footprint in terms of the amount of instructional time, the volume of curricular units. Taking nothing away from the other programs, obviously we have a world-class fine and performing arts program.
One other just historical context piece. When this position was eliminated, it wasn't put up to eliminate world language. It was eliminating an open position. It was really it was a hiring freeze, where we had the opening and we didn't freeze it. It wasn't a value judgment about world language. Yes, library and media services, we proposed, it was cut. This was different than that. This was we were in a freeze program. It's when we cut 17 positions, and so instead of laying off people, we froze positions that were already open. And so that's the context of this. So,
Deb?
So I think I'm hearing that you don't think it would make sense to add a partial second person. Am I hearing that accurately?
yeah, I think that's fair to say that. I mean, I appreciate the problem solving. I appreciate the theory behind it, because when you do see things, you'll see a 0.9 occasionally or a 0.8. I think that would, to create pure part-time opposite could create issues.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, Mark.
So, we haven't had the world language for 3 years and 2. Okay. And what you just said, the .8, and I just never really thought about it until just now. Does the current supervisor teach any classes, or is it just supervising? This supervisor, they teach any classes, or they just supervise?
The way it's in the budget, it's a 1.0, so they would just be
1.0.
supervised.
So I guess, and that's what I thought. So I guess, what's the problem, or what's the issue, not problem, what's the reasoning behind seeing that it went without 2 years, and that doesn't really mean anything, but that, say we hire the new supervisor, but yet they are, say, together, they're 1.2, 1.5, because they're teaching classes as well. So they're both supervising and teaching classes, and that would help, obviously, potentially with the budget as well.
Well, because you'd be reducing one person's position that's already in the position. See, so that, I mean, if, that's the issue, is that somebody right now is 1.0.
Right.
So you couldn't make her 0.6 and make the other person 0.6. You'd be having a 1.0 and a 0.2.
Or 1.5, right?
Or a 0.5.
Or 0.75.
Yeah, yes. And the truth is, that's not something that, the way our agreement with the, there could very well be a practice of what's equitable in that position. It's not an absolute impossibility. It's not the way I would recommend doing the position. If we were starting both the positions from scratch, then you could make an argument, okay, we're going to do 0.8 with 0.2 teaching, so it would be a 0.8 administrator with a 0.2 teaching position attached to it. That I would understand if we were starting both, but the problem is that we're not at this point. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Paul, or...
I think what I would add is it creates a challenging imbalance just from the way that language is taught at the secondary level, which is my assumption as to where the pieces would get picked up in order to make that. At the secondary level, that's a 5-day-a-week responsibility that includes your time in preparation and then your time with students. So at the end of the day, it serves a purpose on paper. You reap those benefits of savings, but the draw away from it is much greater than the fraction of assignment that's actually put toward it relative to the program. So when we thought about it in terms of adding it in, the goal was that we thought that we needed the person for the full supervision. So it was a consideration in terms of how do we go about reinstating that. I think that can, having done that, I think that can draw away from the supervision of the program, would be my 2 cents.
I appreciate what you guys are bringing up about this, because in theory and in reality, it's like 2 security it's not 11, but it's better than 0. And so wouldn't 0.4 or 0.2 be better than 0 or 0.6? The other piece of this is the difficulty of filling the position, and, I mean, not to get too far into the weeds, but the world language, the world language certifications, you have to be certified in Spanish, teach Spanish, French, Chinese, Latin, ancient Greek, sign language. So there's all sorts of different certifications, different than history. And so that person that we're hiring as language supervisor would not only have to be 092 certified, but would also have to be certified in the area that we need right now across the town, which may be a Spanish 0.2 here or a French 0.2 here, because we wouldn't blindly assign them. So right now, we've assigned all the classes of the 2 high schools as we're building the schedules. And when we do that, we try to build it so that Rick at that point is looking at, okay, do we have 5.0 Spanish? Perfect. Do we have 0.8 Spanish? okay, which teacher's willing? Is there somebody that only wants to do 0.8? The problem, as you bring up, is when we have 5.2. How do we find a 0.2 Spanish teacher? Because it's not, oh, I get to just work Fridays. Because there is an element at the elementary school, like for a 0.2 social worker, that may just be I'm working Fridays. At the high schools, it means I'm working 9:15 to 10:05 every day, which is difficult to mesh. So that's the problem with this position, to mesh it from the start coming in and find somebody that'll work 0.4 administratively and then 0.2 or 0.4, but are they French, are they Spanish? It's not, I'll be honest, I'd probably pick the 0 over the 0.4 or 0.6, which isn't easy for me to say, but I don't think, whether I picked it or not, I think by June I might be telling you I couldn't fill it anyway. So that's the reality.
And how many world language teachers right now?
I believe there are 47 FTEs in the budget. I mean, so when you take your part-time and all, it's like 50 plus employees. Correct.
I guess for, discussion point, I mean, I would add it to the list for us to vote on next week, at a minimum. I get it, but I still think we should have it up there as a vote.
Yep, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Moving along. Do we have anything else? Oh, you had a comment on this?
Just have one more.
Oh.
So, and I want you to walk me through this, Tom, is the IT supervisor. I got Jared's Xerox, actually. Technology Xerox, he's sending copies. So, and I understand it, I understood it, and, and I thought about this, because at $120,000 a year, plus, again, a pension at the end of 20 and all that, sometimes that money could even spent on, they're fixing devices. I saw how many tickets they had, but, taking that money, spending it on a new laptop, a new iPad and such, it's, at $700 a piece just for a number, it's 170 devices that they could, instead of spending a significant amount of time maybe trying to fix, they buy a new one. So the $120,000, and I said this before, is technology is really, we're all, I'm relatively old, and I remember them talking with computers would be a paperless society. And that never happened,
We're down to 3 million copies at the high school, right?
All right, so 3 million copies is almost paperless. I would say almost paperless. Technology was always supposed to make things easier. And as technology grows, if you don't absolutely walk on the tip of the spear of new technology, it actually is cheaper. You don't always have to have the best right up front. TVs are a good example that's in everyone's home. TVs are much less expensive than they used to be through technology, and much better too. So I just walk me through it. I'm having it's a 9% increase, and that's a big number. 9% is a big number. Not over the overall budget, it's not, but for this particular department. And I'm having a hard time swallowing this one. And you need to.
Understood. And that's why I wanted to share Jared's memo with all of you and, to share some of the questions from the public. And the one thing I forgot, and I should have remembered this when you asked the question, is this actually restores our IT to what we had in 07 and 08. And this is, I don't ever want to say too many nice things about Jared, but it did give a good description of all the work that Jared's done, moving us to our own fiber network, saving $350,000 from the state. And I won't go through all of that. I'll go through both this position and the need. Our help desk, we used to go from, we used to have 6,569 tickets in 2014, and now it's 12,000 tickets a year. And to clarify one thing, it's not just my screen's down, fix that. Those are network issues. And the other thing is, 3 years ago, we had, I think, a total in the district of 40 cameras. And how many do we have now, Andy?
Including Charter Oak, approaching 400.
Yeah, and so they oversee all the cameras that are in and out at the same time. So, and I appreciate the comments about it should make things easier. I think the volume of use that we have right now, it's just so much larger, and that it used to be, okay, sign out the computer lab because we're using the computers today in class. The computer labs at the high school libraries, I've had conversations with the principals about how can we better utilize space, because they're using the device in the classroom every day in every period. And so what used to be a special thing is now just, it's the pencil and the paper that's in the classroom. And so that's really, when you think about 16 IT professionals spread across every building, you think about offices in America, and they all have an IT person, but I doubt that they have 500 people every day using those devices, and that's if we average just one per building. You look at our two high schools, we're at 1,500 dynamic users every single day with things happening. The other thing is that too much now, the work in our PSIS system, I'm going to defer to Paul and Gretchen here for a second, in what we're required to do. And Chip leaving has an impact on this position, because some of the things that Chip does, the new person that's just a finance person won't be able to do. So I'm going to defer to these guys.
Yeah, I'll start by saying IT is one of those areas where you never really think about it until it doesn't work. And I have to give great credit. I mean, we have seen such dramatic growth in the short period of time that Jared's been with us, both in terms of our efficiency as a district, in terms of our modernization, and the idea that, without this position, my true feeling is that at best we can try to keep a Band-Aid on what we have and not then keep pace with change and keep pace with requirements. I think, to Tom's point, Chip has done an amazing amount and picks up a lion's share of a couple of things. There are huge state reporting requirements that come up every year. Some of these things float through my office. I shudder to think, when he goes, if more of them will flow through my office, but they're huge data pulls relative to student data files, connecting them to disciplinary referrals on a daily basis, or teacher records or attendance records, chronic absenteeism, things of this nature that then have to be sent to the state. And like anything else, I mean, there's a whole data cleaning that you have to get when you download raw data from a system and try to get it into the accurate format and all the rest. And what happens with that, what we've been blessed with so far, is not just being able to pull that down, but then to do the actual analysis on it and things of this nature. And to my understanding, those are the kinds of that's the kind of position that we're talking about in terms of having there in Jared's office. He blends his people that are skilled with that as network people who can do reports, who can do analysis, alongside your technicians who are out there in the schools, and they're tinkering and fixing and keeping us running. And any one piece that's missing from that equation, kind of the system falls down around it.
And so I would also say that from my office, my staff relies heavily on information that is collected at the state level and then triangulated with our own data collection systems around students with IEPs. And the IT folks have learned over the last year or two, with CHIP's help, to generate those reports. We have a large number of students that not only go to school here in West Hartford with IEPs and 504 plans, but also students that may receive services in our town but aren't our residents. We're still responsible for tracking that information, or students that are placed in our town by DCF from other districts and we're forced to share that information. And without their help in being able to make sense of these triangulated reports, it would be incredibly difficult to do our job and to have the state say, good job, you met requirement again because you've met all your timelines and you have all of your information in the right place. So it is something that I have multiple staff work all day long, every day on, and they really rely on that support and help.
And so I have a tickler file of everything that I do to try and remind myself from year to year. And so obviously I'm not going to be here next year, so I go through my tickler file and created a list of everything that's going to IT. So here is 34 items that are going to be transferred to IT. There's the CRDC, which is the Civil Rights Data Collection, which is approximately 40,000 data points on 20 schools that has to be collected. Not once every 2 years, but then every other year you have to make sure you got the systems in place to capture it on a regular basis. We got to keep the addresses up to date because that's how we work on the residency and making sure the kids are assigned to the right schools. There's a whole GPA calculation that are done for that I generate for the college guidance counselors to. What? Then the big thing is the IEP Power School pieces data match, where we're trying to figure out which make sure that the kids that we have in Power School, they're special ed, are the same ones that we have in IEP, they're in special ed, the same one as pieces, because that's important for the state collection process. That happens regularly throughout the period of the time. We also have to do enrollments at the beginning of the month. That's created automatically from Power School. I do that now. We also have the 504 match that we have to do. Residency, we've got blank registration dates. That's part of the data cleanup, so I generally generate that information to remind them to clean up the blank registration date. We like to keep track of when they first entered into the school, so we make sure we get the right district entry date. So if we want to do any type of analysis of how many years they've been in West Hartford Public Schools and what impact there has been on test scores, we do that type of stuff. We have to update the 504 status prior to the 10-1 pieces, so there's a lot of beginning of the year work to clean up all that data at the beginning of the year. There's a pieces memo that has to go out. It's about a 12-page memo that has to be sent out to, because all the schools, because we used to just report aggregate numbers to the state. We now report individual students, everything on those individual students going forward. Let's see what else. We got a sick time letter that has to be delivered out electronically to all the staff, how many sick days they've accumulated. We got to keep the address match going on a once-a-month basis. When magnet enrollment, we got to keep track of the magnet enrollment status. We also have to keep track of, there's the magnet lottery itself that has to be run. The Bristol lottery itself has to be run. The class of 2019 AP analysis. So what we do is we take a look at which kids haven't taken an AP course and based on some of their test scores should be in an AP course, and we send that to the high school principals before course selection for the following year so they can work with those juniors and say, hey, have you thought about doing this type of thing? We do surveys every year. Someone's got to run the surveys, got to create the surveys, got to distribute them, got to send them all out, and then got to analyze all the data. And that's about it.
I just want to say that when I think it was you, Tom, who announced that you were retiring at the end of the year, and he said we're going to have 5 people replace you. Now I understand what he meant. I can't even imagine what we're going to do without your single-handed support. We are going to need 6 people.
Well, you need at least one more.
And the last thing, the topper that I'll mention that Jared touched on, and I was just last week with the head of security at the College Board. When Michael Cohen testified, within 2 days, the number of cyber attacks on the College Board and on universities across the country for grades, and not just for the president, for celebrities, the amount of hits we get are up 300% this year. of people attacking us, trying to get into our system. It is constant. Thankfully, we have Jared. We've seen places, I mean, there's another community that wired $1 million, right? I mean, this is a significant attack, because what happens is ransomware goes in, and it's, we won't release anything in your system until you pay us $50,000. And the response from, there's a reason they do it, because it works.
Thank you. You know, when I got Jared's memo, I don't know if this is a public document. It'd be great for people to see all the work that he's done. I was excited to read it because it reads like a business letter. In fact, watch out. It looks like a resume cover letter here. I'll tell you what. Look at all the money that this department has saved, not only the school district, but the town. But what really jumps out here, and I'm doing my old man thing, trying to read off the phone screen here, but 2007 to 2008 school year, there were 16 FTEs in an IT department, and that's the same staffing level we have now.
That's what I'm requesting.
What's that?
That's what I'm requesting.
Oh, you requested, so they're 15 right now?
Yeah.
Well, even better. I just think that's amazing, the way the technology has exploded over those 10 plus years, and we're still getting by with this. I know where I work, it's quite a different situation, and I would like to see that our students and staff get the same support, or get the support that they deserve.
So Chip, I will never, and you know I'm a big fan, you'll never hear me argue about how much work you do. There's no question about it, and I appreciate that. That was pretty enlightening. It brings me back to my business world days, is where we in the dairy industry uses AS400, and it's, developed by Ross Perot way back when. And, and as a young guy like me coming in and saying, hey, we need a Windows-based environment. This is ridiculous, right? But it's so, that particular AS400 is so robust for our particular business that it's the one that works. And when you showed me all those reports, what is part of that AS400 is reports that have to be done monthly, annually, and that are relative and often, is that you develop a report and you write it, and it pushes it out. If you needed something sent to the state, on February 2nd, that report will generate February 1st, you review it, boom, and it gets sent out. And it's done through the computer, because it's through the algorithm, it's taking all the information throughout that system and then generating exactly what you need. Now, getting that programmed is something that is an expertise. But then those reports definitely get sent out automatically. And I'm going back to a non-Windows based.
One of the problems with those systems is student data privacy, and the structures in place that we have to have now for any vendor just to meet state requirements. And right now there's 28 different state requirements, and the European requirements for the European Union are way more stringent. So this is a national discussion that has to happen, because there's some states that are questioning, can we send information to the College Board because of student data
Talking
privacy?
about the reports you actually send right
But
now.
that's the problem, is that our reports include students' names and IDs.
Right.
So that's
I'm not asking for a vendor to come in. I'm just saying that
anytime you have that company,
No,
that's a
no.
vendor. Like Microsoft.
That was our
is a
system.
vendor.
I don't, whatever.
No, but I
system-
mean Microsoft has to get this certification.
Right.
Pearson has to
No,
get this.
yeah, I get it. It's
Yeah.
whatever system you're using. I just use that as an example.
Yeah.
So if you're using a Microsoft certified, I'm just saying that this is an old, antiquated, robust as it is. I'm just saying that the whatever system you use should have that robustness to it. Whereas that if you have to send certified information to the state from that particular, you're not talking about hiring someone. I'm just talking about with what tools you have now, writing a program to send that out automatically. That's what I'm saying. With using what the tools you have now.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with Jared's expertise that we are at the cutting edge of what we can use, and I say that because I don't know different to argue with you. Go ahead, Paul.
I don't want you to think I'm asking to come
No,
in.
I understand
I just
that.
gave that example because it is a
gotcha.
non-Windows based, and
I
we
gotcha.
are able to do it, and that's all. And that we, I'm sure, have much more robust. That's all.
I was just going to add, Mark, that if I understood the point you were trying to make. One of the things that's interesting with technology today is that they will build in essentially end of cycle deficiencies to defeat the long-term use. We're seeing that right now, and that was what I wanted to make some of my comments more tangible. Our Power School, which is part of our student information system that we use locally, the grading system to that's at the end of use. It's not going to be supported in the future, so we have a mandatory transfer over for all teachers, which A, has to be programmed and set up, and B, Jared's staff will then actually go out into the buildings and help train it. They'll also help support it at the beginning end. They did some work 2 years ago moving our elementary schools from a Microsoft Word report that everyone would fill out to something that was done on the computer that will enable parents in the future, should our principals choose to go in this direction, to be able to go online and see things. Our new website, which is about to be launched, has a much more attractive interface that's also ADA compliant, which is a new piece for websites. So there is actual, there is tried and true, but there is cutting edge work that both is nice to do and sometimes needs to be done. And that again is one of the pieces that without enough of a staff, and I would say even with this person, if you asked Jared if he were up at the table, he'd be asking you for 4 more. It's going to be enough to help keep us running and keep us to be able to have an eye towards the future.
One of the things, and I'm going to agree with you in a way here, something we've talked about before, because every time there's a new administration, I get questions about what are the unfunded mandates that we could talk about. You look at the number of reports. Now that's just in CHIP's area. That's not including all of the grant reports, all of the reports. And listen, I will tell you this: the State Department of Ed is underfunded in terms. It's understaffed. So there's reports that we're sending in, and I'm like, God, I wonder what shelf this is sitting on, because there's a certain utility question. That's something that the legislature needs to think about when they produce bills that say every school will do this. And then when they say you'll do it, part of it is, okay, then we have to report on it and we have to certify that everybody did it. And so that's tracking down all the teachers to make sure they all had their training in X. And then we have to generate a report and send it in. And I'm not sure about the audits on those, is what I'll say. So.
Deb, are you there?
No, I'm good.
Okay, you're
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. All right, moving forward. Did you want to put IT on there? No?
I mentioned it, I brought it up. It's clearly whatever you guys feel it's appropriate, and
So
I opened it for discussion. Whatever you guys want.
I think it's just as a point of order in the way we're doing things. I think if somebody wants to bring it up for a vote, because you can call for a vote on it next week anyway. Right. Mm-hmm. So if it's something that one person wants for a vote to be on, I think it's fair to put it up there. I mean, just in terms of the mechanics of it.
All right, well, let's put it up there.
Just vote no.
Okay. Move.
192, isn't it?
No, you're locking me in, Carol. No, that included the contracted increases. That's the salary of the position.
All right, moving forward. Any other items for discussion? Sure.
Nope.
Are you hearing us all right?
Yes, I hear you fine. Thank you. I'm good.
Okay. All right, anybody else around the table have any other items that we want to discuss to put up there? Or converse?
I'm not sure. I was a little foggy on, if we could just discuss for a minute, you can go right to the front page, page 1. It's on every page. The 5312 to 5642 building-based budgets, the net increase of 113,503 or 1.5%. Can we just have a review of this for a moment again? And
$10,000 per school, I wrote.
Okay, so you're asking for more information from the table.
So those are the, when we do the budget, we set up school and department budgets, that manage the supplies for the budget. The total change in the school's budget was $41,000, $42,000, so the department's budget was approximately $70,000 in the rest of the items. Roughly, it was a 1.5% increase.
so it's not the 113.
Is the whole inflationary increase on the department budgets, yes.
Okay, so I was just wondering how the rest of the board feels about that number. And
It's this from
yeah,
here.
yeah, no, I was looking at that, and it's something I was kicking around as an idea as far as, is that something we should vote on next week?
And then we can have further discussion. I don't see any harm in that. Does anybody else have any? Cheryl?
I don't have any objection, except I don't want to just throw it up without having a conversation about where do we see, okay, so, I mean, before we decide if it goes up, is there something specific that you think this shouldn't be spent on, or is it just not clear where the money, I mean, I'm not clear exactly where the money is going. Is that the question, or?
No, I mean, I remember Chip explaining it. I just wanted to make sure everybody on the board remembered, and that I wanted to throw it up there. Should we vote on whether or not that increase should be approved? So, if the rest of the board needs a refresher about the specifics, that's what I was asking him to do, which he just, I think, did. So, I'd like to consider it.
Yeah, I guess one thing I can say that I didn't make clear enough last time, this is in response to principal's requests, in terms of making sure they have enough money to run their buildings and provide for kids in the way they want to. Chip, what was our decrease in this 2 years ago?
So I have in 2015-16, we increased it by 1%. 16-17, we increased it by 0.4%. In 17-18, we decreased it by 8.4%. And in 18-19, we increased it by 0. So that's the history of it.
And so it's an area where we've seen that decrease. There was some storage things that had built up where we felt like a cut could survive, and we did survive. Those things have been depleted at this point. This is in response to principal requests. Again, it's 113,000. You take the two high, it's just divided by kids when you figure it out. I mean, not purely. I mean, it's also based on needs at different schools, but, that's a problem with having 16 schools. If you do any increase, all of a sudden now you're talking real money. It's the same with an increase in pay. A $5 increase in pay is $210,000, where it just sounds like $5 when you're talking about. So, understood, because it's an increase. Yeah.
So I'm going to help your argument on your IT guy. Because I see $80,000 less on textbooks. And I got to imagine a lot of that has to do with some IT and some such. You're welcome. I just, no, but I just want to see, I guess the reason I really brought that up is, what do we see that trend? Because we're $202,000 budget for 1920. Just your opinion of where you think that's going with technology. Is it now that have we reached the mean of that, and is it going to stay that number for a while, or do we still see some savings? That's all.
More and more of the textbooks are going online. I can point to specific resources over the course of the last 3 years that have gone from a print to an online version, and the savings kind of ebb and flow because depending on how the publishers put it out there. I have a resource right now that we're using. I believe it's in social studies that was on a 3-year cycle, and so in 3 years' time, a bill will come due. I have others that are on an annual cycle, and the publishers, it's a little bit frustrating as a person who's used to a hard copy book, and I know what I paid for it, and I know I could keep it and use it. The advertised shelf life was 5 years, but I could stretch it and get 10 years, so long as content wasn't changing dramatically. And book publishers are in the business of turning a profit. So the price points, that ebbs and flows as well in terms of how they sell it, how many years it's for, and the comparative price. So I think we've seen some decrease because the initial outlays are less, but over time, the market will determine on how well that it becomes a cost savings or just catches back up to previous expenditures based on what they choose to charge per year and whether that's a yearly cost or whether they bundle that and you can get those online services for 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
So you could see a spike one year. For example, like if we had to buy a new modern world history textbook, which is 9th grade, 750 kids, that's going to be $100 a pop just for that one course, and you've got to get one for every 9th grader in the district. Now, kids will use that for 10 years at least, but what they're doing is they're tying you'll get the hardcover book, and you'll get the site license, but the site license will only last 5 years, as Paul says, then we'll have to re-up that. It's a smaller cost, but it's not the pure savings that people had dreamed of, certainly.
All right, and I hate to put you on the spot with the exact line item, but 5520, where that textbook where I saw that $80,000 in savings. Now, I'm assuming that's textbook, paper, tangible, and that there's another line, or is that everything that's electronic, everything?
Well, 5520 is the textbook line. Textbook resources is generally textbooks. When you're talking about, if I understood what you mean by paper, like consumable paper, stuff I'd pass out.
Like a book. No, a book.
Oh,
old
online. Some of our online resources.
That line item's for both?
Some of our online resources, depending on whether it's a primary resource or if it's a subscription, could be under a different line. I think Chip's looking to jump in on that.
It depends significantly on the nature of the resource. Typically, a textbook would be charged to textbooks, and some of those might have a digital textbook.
I guess, so call it $203,000. I got to imagine that's just.
You're on the summary pages for D, right?
Yeah.
So that's a combination of the textbook budgets in Paul's office, which manages the new textbooks, as well as replacement textbooks that are paid for out of individual school budgets.
Yep, I'm good on this one too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other items for discussion that we want to go through or put up? Deb, if that includes you?
I'm all set for tonight. Thank you.
Okay. So, hearing nothing else, then we can close the board BOE workshop for tonight. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for the healthy discussion. Thank you, Deb, for calling in and for your great questions.